Today we're going to be taking a look at the song, the hymn, Stand Up for Jesus, and in the key of G. And we've already done one lesson in the key of G. It was Tell It to Jesus. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going over the chords and the scale, the chords in the key, but go ahead and look that up, and that'll give you a good foundation to build from for this song. But just a quick refresher here. When we say key, you want to think scale. Now learn your scales in the circle of fifths, and that way you know your keys. You're going to learn your keys a lot easier that way, because they go they go in order of ascending in sharps. So from no sharps to 1 sharp, 2 sharps, 3 sharps, and they always add a sharp. So C has no sharps, G has F sharp, then D has F sharp plus 1 more, which is C sharp, and then the next scale has those 2 sharps plus 1 more. So it's just building. And then once we get to the flat keys, which starts at G flat, F sharp / G flat, then we go to the flats, and then it descends in flats. So if you know your scales in the circle of fifths, you know all your key signatures. You know 4 flats, it may take you some time, but once you know your scales in the circle of fifths, then you know at least you can figure it out, and soon you'll be able to know it without having to figure it out. But 4 flats, A flat, it's the third scale in the flats. If you go from G flat, D flat, A flat, and so that's 4 flats. E flat, 3 flats. You'll know these, and you'll learn them a lot better if you base them off of your scales. But when I say key, I say in the key of G, you want to think scale of G. So when we're playing in the key of G, we're using the notes and chords from the G scale. So that's the G scale is G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. And learn your scales. You want to learn them in both hands to be able to play them simultaneously and fluidly, and actually kind of quickly as well. Now, don't play them sloppy, but it's a good exercise. It's a good technique exercise to learn scales and play them and practice them in this way. We have a video on that. It actually has all the scales, all the chords, the chord inversions as well, and it's good to know. It's essential to know that as you start to learn hymns. But so for Stand Up for Jesus, we're in the key of G. Think of the scale of G, and the chords are the 1, 4, and 5 chord. In any key, the major chords are built off of the 1, 4, and 5. Again, we went over this in detail in the lesson on Tell It to Jesus, which is also in G, so refer back to that if you want more information on the chords. But suffice to say now, the 1, 4, and 5 is the G chord, which is G, B, D. The 4 chord is C, C, E, G, and the 5 chord is D, D, F sharp, A, along with the 7. Now remember, the 5 chord can have the 7 in it. That's the only of the major chords that has a major chord and a flattened 7. So it gives us this dominant 7, which is a strong lead back to the 1 chord. The 5 can also include the 7. We keep that in mind. Remember that. Now also, we don't use minor chords in this song. A lot of hymns just use strictly the 1, 4, and 5. But every once in a while, you'll come across an occasional minor chord. You'll come across an occasional borrowed chord. Some hymns get quite complex, but for the most part, they're just this simple. But if you do come across a minor chord, your minor chords are built off of the 2, 3, and 6. So the second note of the G scale, the third note of the G scale, and the 6th note of the G scale. So the 2 in G is A minor, A, C, E. Then the 3 chord is B minor, B, D, F sharp, and the 6 chord is E minor, E, G, B. But we won't use any of the minor chords in this song, but now you know how to find them, and you want to be familiar with all the chords in a key. Because you will come across them, and also as you get better and you want to start adding to or embellishing a song, then you'll want to use minor chords. You'll use them as substitutions. You'll use them as passing chords. And also, as you get to know all the chords in all 12 keys, then you'll also be able to quickly recognize borrowed chords when you see, well, that chord, those keys, those notes don't belong in this key, so what's going on? You'll be able to quickly recognize those. Now, stand up for Jesus is in 4/4 time, so 4 beats per measure. Quarter note gets 1 beat. The rhythm is pretty straightforward for the most part. But before we jump into learning the melody, we want to analyze the hymn sheet and figure out what are the chords for each measure. Now remember, in 4/4 time, we're looking for chords, 1 chord per measure. And sometimes there will be a chord change on the 3rd beat. And we've seen that in our other hymn lessons. But here, I've left as you see, this hymn book page has no chords written in because it's important for you to practice writing them in and figuring them out. So if before I reveal the chords, or I start filling in the chords here, stop the lesson and download the sheet music, download this page here, and go through and figure out what the chords are. Going from the chords that are in the key of G, the 1, 4, and 5, basically those are your 3 options, G, C, or D, and then figure out which chord goes with each measure. Okay, so the way we do that, let's start here. This is a pickup note right here. So that comes in on the 4. We're not going to worry about what's happening here. We want to think about chords for every measure and change them as much as possible on the 1st beat. So right here, you start with the melody note. It's a G. Now what chords can accommodate a G? Well, C chord can, and so can the G chord. Of our 3 options, those are the only ones. So let's continue analyzing. What's the next note down here? This is a B. There's only 1 chord of our 3 options that has a G and a B in it, and that's the G chord. So let's assume this entire measure is G. Is there anything that would cause us to think that there needs to be a chord change in this measure? Well, the bass note stays consistent on the 1st and the 3rd beat, so we're going to leave G on this whole measure. So think of this whole measure as G. Now, we've got a melody note here that is a G, so again, our 2 options are C or G chord. Well, the next note down here, that's an E chord. That's an E note. So the only option that accommodates a G and an E is a C chord, and we've got a C octave down here, so this is a C chord here. The bass note stays on a C the entire measure, so we're going to leave this entire measure a C. Now, a lot of times you can figure out the chord just by looking at the melody note. Now, not always, but like in this case, we look at the G that the song starts on, and we say, well, that could be a G or a C chord. But almost all songs are going to start on their 1 chord. It establishes that home, that tonal base, that tonal center. So almost all songs are going to start on the 1 chord. So we know right off the bat, we don't even have to figure it out. You see the G note up there, and we know this is going to start on the G chord. Now it moves to the 4 chord, and then here, let's see, we've got a D, so this could be either a D chord or a G chord. They both have a D in them. But this note is a G, this note is a B. The only chord that has a B, G, and D in it is the G chord. Now let's go to our third beat and see if there needs to be a chord change. Well, what chord accommodates an A, a D, an F sharp, and an A? Only D. However, it goes from, on the 3rd beat, it goes from an A, then it goes to a G chord again. So it quickly passes from D to G. So you could play a D chord here on the 3rd beat. But I would advise you to switch back to the G here before you go to this D chord. But for a beginner, I would say leave the G chord for the entire measure, because most of the 3/4 of the measure is all G chord. And so this, you can just treat this as a passing note, passing through the A, but it stays on a G chord. And then here we have A, D, F sharp, and D. Now again, you could just stop after the A, because of our three options, only D contains an A. Only the D chord contains an A. So you need to go through this entire sheet, and it's very repetitive. So once you start to get the once you get like the first phrase down, you're going to start recognizing a lot of the same. Like here, this is the same as this. So you see that's the same chord. This measure 6 is the same as this measure, right? All a lot of similarities. But go through and practice writing in the chords. You've got to practice doing that, and the more you do that, then the better you'll get. And soon you won't have to write in the chords at all. You won't even have to think about it. You'll just recognize them right off the bat, but only after you start practicing writing them in. So I'm going to go ahead and reveal the chords that have been written in, that I've got written in. Let me see here so that you can see. Okay, let me find it here. Got it. Okay. So there's the chords there, and the melody, as you can see, starts with a D on the 4th beat, a pickup note, and then it goes to the G. Now this G is a dotted quarter note, so it's held for 1.5 beats. So when you're counting it, you would hold this for 1, and then you would say 2, and then you would play this in between the time you say the 2nd beat and the 3rd beat. So 1, 2, and 3. So then it goes to a B here, and then back to a G. So it's the first note, stand, is D, G, G, B, G, G. That's a half note, gets 2 beats. E, G. Now we're on measure, the 3rd full measure. Soldiers. D, G, A, B, A. So those are all quarter notes except for that last note, A, where we're singing cross, and that's a dotted half note, which gets 3 beats. So we hold it for 3, come in with the D, lift high. Lift is on the 4th beat of the 4th full measure. So we hold that for 1 beat, and then we're going to repeat. It's very, very similar to the first phrase. So we go to G for a dotted quarter, then an 8th note G to B, back to G for a quarter note, then G for 2 beats. I'm on banner. Banner. So ner comes in on the E quarter note, then G quarter note, then D quarter note, G quarter note, B quarter note, A quarter note, G dotted half, hold it for 3. Now, from victory unto victory is the chorus. So the first note of the chorus is from. It starts with from, and the note is a D. It's a quarter note, so 4, one beat. Victory is an A, dotted quarter again. Hold it for 1.5. Then come in with that 8th note in between the 2nd and 3rd beat. Then down to G for a quarter note, A for a quarter note, B for a half note, which is 2 beats. Then tree, his, those are both quarter notes on the B. Then we come up to the C. C for a quarter note, B for a quarter note, D for a quarter note, A for a quarter note, then G. This would also be a dotted half, but since the melody note drops down, it's tied over to that quarter note. So it's 1, 2, 3. It drops down to that F sharp on the 3rd beat. Then we're here on the last phrase of the chorus, till. That's a D quarter note. Every. That's a G dotted half, so a beat and a half. Then an 8th note G to B quarter note, G for a quarter note. Then we stay on G, and we sing, we're singing on measure 15, we're singing vanquished. Vang, right there. G for a half note, that's 2 beats. E for a quarter note, back to G for a quarter note. Christ is Lord indeed, they're all quarter notes. D, G, B, A, then and G for a dotted half note, 3 beats. So that's the melody there. Now, I don't often talk about the fingering, but let's look at some fingering tips here from the very beginning. Let me just give you this helpful hint. This is a great way to have your fingers for a lot of songs in G, because melodies are quite often pentatonic, meaning they use these 5 notes. And sometimes they'll use the others, but mainly it's these 5. So if I just use my thumb for the D, my 2 for the E, my 3 for the G, 4 for the A, and 5 for the B, I can play most of this song without moving my hands. So watch as I play the first phrase. And the same is true for the next phrase. It's just a slight variation on that third measure of the phrase. So that you don't have to move your hand at all. Just use your thumb for this D, your 2 finger for this E, the 3 finger for the G, 4 finger for the A, 5 finger for the B. You don't have to move your hand. Just do it just like that. And this is true for a lot of songs. Find the pentatonic position, like Amazing Grace. Don't have to move your hand. How about Tell It to Jesus? There it goes. And this actually uses the C. So, but by and large, you can get away with just finding that. And really, in songs in G, your position will be thumb on the D, because this is the range that that we're singing in. So D, E, G, A, B. If a song were in F, it'd be the same, just down a whole step, right? A flat, it's different because the range changes, but the pentatonic position for A flat would be this: E flat, F, A flat, B flat, C. So we can get more into the pentatonic position and the scale, pentatonic scale, but that's the fingering you can use for almost this entire song. When we get down to the chorus, I think the only place where you have to depart from this position is when you got to reach this C. So you can prepare by, I'll show you here. When you get to these notes right here, victory, victory, his army. Army is on a C, so you can switch your 5 finger for your 4 finger right here. Just switch from your 5 finger like this. So I'm playing victory, his army. So victory. See how I've switched to my 4 finger? Army. Then here I just go back to my same position. So you could do it that way, and just figure out what feels best for you when you have to play that C, and also there's that F sharp there when the melody drops. But let's go ahead and look at this chord right here. And I didn't mention this earlier, but we have this. It says D sus. Now, what is a D sus chord? Well, think of your chord in root position, and then we assign numbers to the notes in the chord. And I know we've got a lot of numbers going back and forth. We've got the 1, 4, and 5 chords, right? But when we think of the chord, there are degrees of the chord. So when we're thinking of a C chord, then we think the root of the chord, we'd call the root, or the 1. Then in root position, that middle note is the third of the chord. And the 5th note, the 5, is the fifth of the chord. So when we go to the D chord, we got the 1, 3, and 5 of the D chord. And that's also where we say D7, 1, 3, 5, 7, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Where these numbers are in relation to the chord, not the key, right? When we were talking about the 1, 4, and 5 chord, the 2, 3, and 6, the minor chords, that's all in relation to the key or scale that we're in. But when I'm talking about the D7, that 7 is in relation to the D chord. So when we talk about the notes of a chord, we actually come up with the 1, 3, 5, 7, and then also with the D chord, you have the 9, 11, and 13 as well, and that's with any chord. Those are all notes relative to the chord. So sometimes you'll see in advanced music like a D13, flat 9, that kind of thing. It's all referring to those upper notes of the chord. They're called chord tensions, and they're just you just extend the chord out. But for a D sus, we just have to worry about the third note. The third note is altered for a moment to create a really pretty resolution. So what happens here is we take a D chord and we suspend this third note. In other words, we move it here for a moment because it pulls us back down to that third. It's a really pretty movement. So that's what's going on right here from the D sus to the D7. D suspended to D7. And the 7's not in there, but I would put it in there. I'd probably just play it maybe in the left hand or something. And you don't have to. You may like the sound of it better without the 7. Now, this is a very common movement. You're going to see it on the 1 chord also, and you'll see it on the 5 chord. It's always there. In hymns and popular music and contemporary Christian music, they use the suspended, the suspension, the 1 sus, is it 1 sus, or the 1 chord suspended, or the 5 suspended. Now the reason why they don't do it with the 4 chord, or at least not in this way, is because the 4 chord doesn't have a natural fourth. It's got a sharp fourth. So you've got this really pretty chord. This is really pretty also, but it's this fourth is not. It's not in the same relation. It's a half step from the 5, so it's not the same. Now it's still pretty, and you'll still see it used quite often, but not in this way. So it doesn't sound the same. However, watch for the suspended movement, that suspended chord, and then to the regular version of the chord. And you'll hear this at the end of a song when we get to like the end of this song. That was the 1 suspended, and then we move to the regular third of the note of the chord, and that gives it that pretty ending. So I'm sure you're already recognizing that sound, but you'll hear it all the time, and so be on the lookout for that. The more the more you're familiar with these common movements and these common progressions, the easier all these hymns are going to be as you start to learn them. Well, let's go ahead and let me play this for you again. Go ahead and play. To start off with, if you're a beginner, play 1 chord per measure. And in the left hand, to keep it simple, play your G chord in second inversion. That means 5 finger on D, use your 2 finger on G, and your thumb on B, and that's your G chord. Right? It's the same as this, but we've moved this note down here, the D. Instead of playing it up here, we're playing it down here. Right? See that? That's what's happening. So there's your G chord, and then play your D in root position right here. Leave your thumb on the D. Play F sharp and A like that. And if you need the 7th, you can play it like this. You can play it without the A in it. And then your C chord, play it in root position also. C, E, G. And your hand doesn't have to move hardly at all to play these 3 chords. Now let's go ahead and practice. Let's go through it. I'll play the first phrase or two to demonstrate how you would do this 1 chord per measure. Now, if you want to start adding to it, the next step I would say is add more chords, play more chords in the left hand. So you've got every beat that is available for you to add a chord to. So if you're to play 2 chords per measure, play on the first and third beat. Now, from here, as you get more familiar with chords, add in notes from the chord in the right hand. Now, this is where you really start to branch out into where you're going to take this to the next level of playing. That's going to kind of open the door to the rest of the possibilities, and that's when you start adding to the right hand. So to fill out the right hand, you just take the chord, you play the melody note as the top note, and then whatever chord we're on for that measure, you fill in those notes in the right hand. So the very first measure is a G chord, the melody is a G. So what other notes go in a G chord? G is G, B, D. So we've got the G here. Let's add in the B and the D. And we would play the right hand that way. Now the next melody note jumps up to a B. Now this is still the G chord. The B is the melody note, so let's fill in the other notes. So G is G, B, D. B is here. D and G can go there. So we'd play the first measure like this. And then C. Okay, the G of the C is the melody note, so this other notes in C is E and C. So we would add those down here. Now the next, when we say G sus, right, it goes down to, the melody note goes down to an E. Now let's fill in the rest of the notes. In a C chord, we've got C, E, G. E is here, so C and G go there. So the first 2 measures in this method would be continued on there, but you get the idea. So you start adding in filling in the notes of the chord. Now this requires, a bit more familiarity with the keys, the chords, and a little bit more technical ability to move your hand to get around the keyboard. Also, you're probably going to have to move your hand up the octave, so your hands are going to be spread out, just so that they stay out of the way of each other. But let me give you an idea what this would sound like. Now that's a big step, and if you can play like that, and begin mastering those movements, then start to embellish your left hand, or fill in your left hand. So a chord every beat is one option, but if you'll notice, a lot of piano players don't play chords in the left hand. They don't camp out up here. They use this area of the keyboard in the left hand. So the way you would start to utilize that area, you don't want to play chords down here. They sound too muddy. But a great option is an octave. And so if the chord is a G chord, then you can play a G octave. G octave just means 8 notes, G to G. If the chord is a C chord, then you would just play a C octave. And if the chord is a D chord, you would play a D octave. So, to start off with, just play an octave, maybe on the first beat or on the first and third beat. And then you can start to play octaves on the first and third beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. But The goal in this style would be to be able to go from octave to chord, and this is a very common way to play, very full, and it's a great way to play hymns, especially. So it's octave, chord. So you would do octave on the first beat, chord on the third beat. Now, when the chord changes on the third beat, then you would play. You can play 2 octaves, like on that last measure of the verse. It goes from G to D on the third beat. So you could play the G octave and the D octave back to G instead of playing a chord. Or you could play G octave D chord to G. Other more advanced options would be to walk the bass, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Now we'll get into those more down the road. But from here, try to start playing on the first beat an octave, on the third beat a chord. And really also, from there, the next step is to play an octave chord every beat. Now this is certainly out of the realm of beginner, but let me just give you a taste of this. It would be G, D, G chord, D chord. So in this way, we don't go to that G every time. But on the first beat, we play the root of the chord in an octave form, and then the chord. And on the third beat, we play the 5th note of the chord in octave form, then the chord again. So it's 1, 5, 1, 5. For C, it would be 1, 5, 1, 5. For D, it would be 1, 5, 1, 5. And we'd play that bouncing back and forth every beat. So that gives you an idea, and wherever you're at, you can kind of take the next step there. But let me show you a few more options. If you say, "Well, I'm not ready to go that far, but I want to do something different." Well, here's a great option for a beginner to add some variation. You say, "I'm tired of just playing the chord every beat." What you can do is you can play a broken chord. Now, we've been learning chords blocked. Blocked chords means that all the notes are played together. But you can play the notes broken, just break the notes up. And it works beautifully because if you go up and down, that's 4 notes. We're in 4/4 time. So we can go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that sounds really good. You can also play those notes twice as fast, and so play them as 1/8 notes. It still works out because it would just take up and down the chord twice per measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another way to play broken chords is to spread the notes out. Now this professionals play this pattern, and as easy and as simple as it is, professional pianists will play this because the simplicity is profound. All you do is you spread the notes out like this: C, G, E. If you have a hard time with that reach, then you can just do C, G, C. and you do it the same way. You can play, actually, I would say play 1, 2, 3, hold. 1, 2, 3, hold. 1, 2, 3, hold. You can also go 1, 2, 3, 4. And the same principle applies here. You can double it up. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Very pretty pattern. And I keep playing C, but we're in the key of G, so it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, along those same lines, let me just give you this last pattern. And this is getting more on the advanced side. But same thing here. This pattern is a classic. It's used by beginners and professionals because it's just so great. And it's just the root of the chord, the fifth of the chord, the root again, then you cross over and you play the note above the root, which is called the second, the 2, or sometimes called the 9, and then the third of the chord. Like that. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, there's one other variation of that pattern right there. Is you can go up and down. So just as with the first one, I said you can just go 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, or you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, up and down. And of course, you can double it up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, with this one, you can go up and down also. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, again, watch. It's the root of the chord, the fifth of the chord, the root of the chord again, then the note above the root, the 9, with the 2 finger. You need to cross over your thumb, and then use your thumb on the third of the chord, and then you just do it in reverse. To the 2 finger, then under with the thumb, 2 on the 5 of the chord, which in this case is the D, and then pinky back on the G. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, the only tricky part here is lining up the right hand and left hand. So make sure you're counting. If you're going to go ahead and try to do those, you got to count the rhythm, because like for the first measure, it's 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3, 4. Okay, so my left hand is doing 1 and 2 and 3. So that 8th note would line up with that. 1, 2, stand up, 4, G. So you got to count it all out, or else you're going to get those wrong. And a lot of times students are so anxious to do this that they just shove them together like puzzle pieces that don't fit, and it doesn't sound right. Really, the only challenging part would be those 8th notes that you see scattered throughout. Everything else would be pretty simple to get because they're all in divisions of whole beats. But anyway, those different patterns there, whichever level you're at, I've given you, we went all the way to advanced advanced techniques here. But whichever level you're at, or whichever one you're ready to tackle, take him playing to that level. And also, you can also, once you learn the left hand well, you can start to embellish the right hand more along with the left hand. So start adding in more notes in the right hand, moving up the octave. And by the way, let me say this about filling in the right hand. You don't feel like you have to fill in every note of the melody. Sometimes I'll fill in, and then I'll play a melody note by itself. So just use your discretion. What sounds good to you? Make it, experiment with it. See what you like. See what sounds good. And sometimes it's just a preference of what's easier. It's hard to hit a chord on that melody note. So you can just leave it out. It's not that important. But to begin to fill it out in that way, that's important. Take that step. But I hope you're excited about learning those several different patterns in the left hand and apply it to this song, Stand Up for Jesus. And good luck with it.